G'day. How you going? Yeah. Can you all make sense of my slightly weird Swedish Australian accent, first of all? Yes. Okay. For the introverts, just nod. For the extroverts, please don't hold back. Um, just making sure this slightly weird signal is getting picked up by some of the more analog and some of the more digital radio antenna in the room. All right, fantastic. I went on a date the other night and someone saw my surname and then I started speaking. And they said, "You sound so disappointingly Australian. You, you sound like you're Anders from Wagga Wagga." And I said, "Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment." So now that I've offended all the people from Wagga Wagga, is there anyone in the room? No? Okay, fantastic. Now, as a futurist, which basically means my mum has absolutely no idea what I actually do for a living, she calls me her son, the one who used to be a lawyer, who's now a glorified astrologer. There's no one like your family to tell you what you actually truly do for a living. But as a futurist, I like to claim that I'm a little bit of a humanist and, dare I say, a little bit of a traditionalist. Because when it comes to the future of tourism and certainly the future of any business today, even in an age of artificial intelligence, of Oculus Riftses, of Apple Vision Pro, etc., I do believe we're going to have a human in the loop. A human that treasures the human meeting, a human that treasures ecotourism, that is not just happy to sit at home in virtual reality to explore this beautiful part of the world. Now, if I cast my mind back to around 22 years ago, when I went backpacking around Australia, if I really think about it, about 90% of that pie chart of backpacking around Australia was in which state? Absolutely. So I love this state, and I've had the opportunity over the years to work with Tom Tate from Gold Coast City Council, with Kylie Porter from GW3, which is a really cool alliance. Anyone from GW3 here today? Really cool combination, right, of Mackay, Isaac, and Whitsundays. Now, you might think that there are some different interests in those three regions, right? But they come together to collaborate on sustainable futures. So without further ado, let me tune into a future that's going to feel as much about science fiction as being now science fact. Now, let's cast our minds back to this little movie. Who remembers this movie, Ex Machina? Launched a few years ago. It's a movie about artificial intelligence gone haywire. The fundamental plot line in this movie is about artificial general intelligence, and particularly about the Turing test. What's the Turing test? It's an imitation test when a human exposed to a person or a robot does not know whether it's interfacing with a robot or a human because the AI is so sophisticated. Sound dystopian? Sound a bit familiar to certain things you've been experiencing recently? Yeah, like generative AI. Now, when the directors and producers behind this movie thought about how do we launch this ID virus of artificial intelligence gone haywire, they thought, why don't we launch it at the coolest conference in town, the DestinationQ conference app. No, they launched it at the second coolest conference in town, which is called South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. But they did it on the most logical digital platform available to us at the time, on Tinder, where they built a little bot, unbeknownst to the lovesick puppies, based upon the looks of the Swedish actress Alicia Vikander with all the cyborg headgear. And because she's female, but also artificially intelligent, she was able to have a multitude of conversations geostrategically for everyone that had changed their geo passports on Tinder to Austin, Texas at the conference, who all thought they would be able to go on a hot date later on that evening with Alicia Vikander. Like any good marketing conversation, at the end of this very, very naturally flowing conversation, there was a good call to action which said, hey, if you want to see more pretty pictures of me, please go to my Instagram account. What do you think awaited them when they went onto her Instagram account? A little message saying, you've been hacked. Here's a promotion about a movie about artificial intelligence and the Turing test being met. Does this sound eerily familiar? Science fiction today is becoming science fact. And in fact, what we are seeing now through generative AI is that AI now speaks human. Now, it used to be that for anybody that's not a technologist, we could kind of hide around the fact that we're not software engineers. But today, if you can speak, if you can interface with ChatGPT via voice or your digits, today we're all coders. And my big question to all of you as you think about the future, 2030, 2032, whatever your time horizons might be, or even 2044, what human impact or innovation will you now code for? Whether you're a small business, a medium-sized business, or a big business, or if you're in government, what human impact will we now code for? What can we innovate and do better? Now, if this sounds a little bit anxiety-inducing, the good news today is that you no longer need to go and see a human psychologist for your anxiety. You can just go on to Wobot instead. And on Wobot, which is an AI psychologist today, for teenagers who suffer from anxiety, they are reporting anecdotally the same efficacy as they would if they went and saw a human cognitive behavioral therapist. Isn't this amazing? Now, please go and see your GP before you have that conversation. But in a country like Australia, where it takes 9 months on average from a GP referral to actually going to see a real human psychologist, because that's how long it takes because we have such a shortage of psychologists, do you think AI can start filling the gap? And having worked with the likes of Hungry Jack's, I also know that if somebody orders from a non-judgmental robot in a Hungry Jack's, they supersize their order more because the robot will not judge you. The point about artificial intelligence and technology today is that, again, to help us take the robot out of the human. We all do really, really boring work at times, right? We didn't come into this industry just to punch Excel spreadsheets and do regulation, right? We want to hang out with human beings to showcase our beautiful natural environments, to showcase transformational opportunities, to introduce them to our indigenous cultures. Not to punch spreadsheets, although some people should keep doing that because it's amazing work as well, right? It can help us turn a should into a could. We all know we should be doing more video content, more newsletters, more social media, more TikTok dancing, whatever it happens to be, right? And then we go, but it's so hard. Today, because of generative AI, it's turning a should into a could, getting us out of procrastination because it's now easier for us to bring our human creativity and our soul to the world. Make sense? Think of AI as turning a should into a could, helping us do less of the menial and the mundane and more of the meaningful and the humane. Now, let me give you an example of why the human is key in the responsible deployment of new technologies. This is the Apple Card, a really cool fintechy credit card launched by Apple a few years ago. And they thought when they launched it, let's just do away with all traditional FICO scoring to set our credit limits and credit risk. Let's just use artificial intelligence. And in a big ceremony, they gave a card to Steve Wozniak, one of the founders of Apple, and one to his wife. Now, they share all financial credentials, unbeknownst to Apple. In a big ceremony, they gave him a card, and magically, it had 10 times the credit limit as that of his wife. Why on earth was this? Because, of course, women are more of a credit risk than men, according to the AI. Now, in whose family is this certainly not the case? Yeah? All right, there's a few. All right, fantastic. Somebody holds on to the purse strings while he buys man bags. All right. How do you think this product launch went when Steve Wozniak and his wife took to Twitter, now X, to complain about the inherent sexism of the artificial intelligence? Absolute miserable product launch. My point here is we have to have human ethics, human empathy, and human values embedded when we code for more technologically advanced futures. My little equation for all of this, and I'm not a mathematician, so please bear with me, is that the future of tourism and any brand today is the combination of you working on your emotional quotient, your emotional intelligence, your unique intelligence as a leader, as a personal brand, but also your creative quotient. And then we sprinkle some digital augmentation, an AI growth mindset on top of that, and we'll have the most empathetic, most human-centric brands that we could ever imagine. That is my promise to all of you. Now, before we talk about how we can do this in the great state of Queensland, I want to take you back on a historical journey back into the past for a moment in time to tell you why a futurist would also be a bit of a humanist and a bit of a traditionalist. Let me take you back to my native city of Stockholm, Sweden, for a moment in time. Back to the 1910s, to a time that was just a little bit slower. Things were just a little quieter. They were a little bit more black or white, not as grayscale and as complex as they seem to be today. And this here, back in the 1910s, a few years before the pandemic of that era, the Spanish flu hit Stockholm, Brisbane, and other parts of the world, was the urban vista that once upon a time greeted a man by the name of Georg Johansson, or the son of Johan, or an Australian George Johansson. As the second oldest son on the family farm, he had few inheritance rights. So as a result, he had to make his own commercial future in the cityscape of Stockholm. And his commercial opportunity after completing a retail apprenticeship after nearly 6 years was to take his venture capital, his life savings, and breathe life into his first bricks and mortar store. His commercial opportunity was to dress the increasingly sophisticated Swedish gentleman of that era. And this, of course, was a time before TikTok, before YouTube, before Instagram, even selfie sticks or Instagram husbands, when looking into a camera was still very much of a technological novelty. And in a cap nod of approval to his family heritage, everything was about the belly to belly, the face to face, the seasonally adjusted girth of the Swedish gentleman. It gets cold in winter time. About the personalized, tailored portfolio of clothing. And in a cap nod of approval to his family heritage, as he became a man of entrepreneurship, he changed his surname from Johansson to the man from the southern farm, or in Swedish, Georg Sörman. He's my great-grandfather, and as you can tell, he must have been a bit of a futurist because he's got a great haircut, cool little pocket square, where you can also see that we share some genealogical traits with North Korean dictators. And he invested in the latest technology of that era, the neon sign, to win the then analog hearts and the then analog minds of yesteryear's customers. But for my mother, Birgitta, who looks pretty amazing for a 106-year-old, as you can tell, we've moisturized in our family. She still dresses me every day, and she tells me Harry High Pants is coming back into fashion. For her, the business environment has shifted underneath her feet, certainly in an era of digital disruption, but also the fact that yesterday her customers changed. Today they'll walk into the shop, spend time with mum over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. She'll tell them about all the beautiful organic cottons that she sources from family businesses around the world. And then incentivized with a 5% discount from amazon.com/fashion, they'll scan that barcode, upload it to the cloud for a 5% discount. Then they'll say, hey, we'll think about it. And you know they're not going to think about it. They then exit the store to the sound of a very, very lonely little bell and order the item on mrporter.com or on Amazon instead, turning my mum's business into a showroom or a change room. My mum calls this new customer a cyber terrorist. And I think you can understand why. The way my mum runs this business in a very analog fashion, in a very beautiful old school fashion with a pen and paper, measuring her SKUs, that's her version of big data, in many ways is perfectly prepared for a world that no longer exists. Now, can you imagine how annoying it must be to have a son who's a futurist? Who feels like you're just part of a family therapy session so far, by the way? Okay. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a little love letter to my mum called Digilog, How to Win the Digital Minds and the Analog Hearts of Tomorrow's Customers, where I argued that, Mum, the future is not about throwing away the analog baby with a digital bathwater. It's about excelling in both of these two worlds together at the same time. And never has this been more true than at this moment in time where we're also embracing artificial intelligence because we no longer have a monopoly on intelligence as human beings. It's about doing best in both of these two worlds to win both minds as well as hearts of tomorrow's tourists, doing so in a digilog fashion. In 2020, after 104 years in business and in my mum's failure to listen to Future Signal, my parents had to file for bankruptcy. 3 generations of blood, sweat, and tears at the ages of 70 and 67. This is not when you want to file for bankruptcy. And tragically, Stockholm's oldest menswear store and the only family-owned menswear store had to close down. And my mum always points her finger at the pandemic. But she hates the digital world. She thinks of the digital world as digitally dehumanized, but in her attachment to the past, she jeopardized any chances for this little family business to actually live on in the future. Now, I've just spent time with my mum, and we're way better friends when we talk family rather than business together. As you can tell, you can probably sense a little bit of intergenerational tension in this particular context. Now, it hurts me to do a post-mortem on this. I wish I could tell you the perfect Harvard Business School turnaround story, but this is the raw and the real. While she failed in her business, there were many retailers who flourished through the pandemic. Who were those? They were those that had digitally diversified their offerings and were able to service their clients in the digital world, when the most human-centric customer journey became the digital contactless customer service. My mum had no options because the only thing she could do was the smiling human interface that would shake your hand, and nobody wanted to do that. It wasn't just you early on today, James, who was left hanging. It was also my mum. Now, my mum has given me permission, if you're wondering about these skeletons in our closet. She gets paid in a non-fungible token every time I speak about it. Okay. Now, post-mortem suck, ladies and gentlemen, which is why I want to invite all of you to think about your own pre-mortem. Why pre-mortem? Because we can design a different outcome before it's too late. So imagine that it's now 2030, and on your watch, your company went belly up. What were the future trends that you just missed? What were the future signals that you deliberately chose to ignore? And what were the investment decisions, either in yourself, your technology stack, your sustainability credentials, that you just delayed and delayed that led to that demise? And instead, as a result of spending time here at Destination Q today, what change will you make today to prevent that from happening? Now, I was just in Barcelona, and by the way, feel free to take a picture of this and share it on your next date night, or if your kids aren't studying enough for their Year 12 exams, just show them this little pre-mortem. Not to guilt them into action, just to have a really open conversation. All right? Now, I was in Barcelona last week speaking at an accounting conference, professional services conference, and did you know that the carbon accounting industry is growing by 22.1% year on year and is forecast to by 2030 be a $65 billion industry? This is counting the emissions of every organization. Why do you think this is happening? Because people are caring about eco. They're caring about ecotourism. They're caring about our planet in a way we never have before. Now, I recently sat down with Nikki Sparshott, who's the CEO of Unilever for Australia and New Zealand, on our podcast, The Second Renaissance. My mum says it's a great listen. And she says something profound in that interview. She said, Anders, today, just because you're purpose-led doesn't mean you're profit-deprived. She's transformed Unilever, and if you're into ice creams or deodorant, you know some of their products. Who's into ice cream or deodorants or anything in between? All right? Now, she's transformed Unilever, Australia, and New Zealand to becoming a certified B Corp, meaning they achieve at the highest levels of sustainability credentials across the board. Just to do that with one brand for T2, took them working with 400 different global suppliers to reskill, upskill, and sometimes replace them to make sure the whole supply chain steps into sustainability. Imagine doing that for every brand in the Unilever family. She said, Anders, the most prosperous brands at Unilever are the most purpose-led brands. She wholeheartedly at Unilever embraces their ikigai, as the Okinawans call it, their life's purpose, right? Their reason for being. And today in business, we can live that, and certainly in the tourism sector, we can live that guilt-free every day. It's when we do what we're good at, when we do what earns us some money, yes, but it's doing what we love and increasingly what the world needs. And I believe today, tourism is about regenerative tourism. It's tourism that's good for yourself and your soul, healing yourself, but at the same time, healing and regenerating the planet, as well as local business. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I think of not just as a set of 17 different goals and focus areas, but as little mini ikigais, right? And they are a creativity catalyst, doing more with less, having our planetary and our profit cake and eating it at the same time. Let me give you one example. The little Aussie brand Who Gives a Crap that sells recycled toilet paper, and not in that way. They were one of the largest Australian corporate philanthropists during the pandemic by selling us recycled toilet paper, giving away 50% of their profits to UN Sustainable Development Goal number 6, clean water and sanitation, which is part of their ikigai, their purpose. $5.85 million as a startup. This is profound, but they are still for profit, right? What's your version of this in Queensland? Who are you nurturing, regenerating with your profits? This is about people, planet, and profits, and doing well on all metrics at the same time. And while I love the idea of building toilets in Africa, there are communities and bio ecosystems in this state that also need regenerating. So we also need to, yes, make a difference locally and regionally as well. What's your contribution to all of this moving forward? I believe when we look at tourism and travel today, whether it's going to Burning Man for transformational experiences, or the hordes of Australians that go to Peru to do ayahuasca, to experience traditional wisdom and go deep to heal their own trauma, maybe we need to wake up to the fact that when we heal our inner children, we can do so in our own backyard. I'm not talking about ayahuasca necessarily, but traditional wisdoms in exploring our own cultures. Isn't this a beautiful image, by the way, about relationships and the healing of the children inside? Because I believe this is what tourism is all about, having great experiences together in our families, right? And doing so intergenerationally. Now, I was sitting with a business partner of mine in London last Monday, and he said, Anders, when I want my kids to tune out of Fortnite and do something intelligent, I show them Bluey. This is telling you something. Also, I get all my parenting advice from Bandit, so Bluey is profound, all right? And if you go, hey, but we're in Queensland and we still have minerals and resources, we still sell coal, right? We can't really talk about our eco-credentials here. I always go, think Norway, the Saudi Arabia of Scandinavia, right? They're the second greenest economy on the planet. 97% of all electricity generated comes from renewable sources, and Tesla has about 25% market share of all vehicles sold, right? How do they fund all of this? Oil and gas. And my Norwegian friends have absolutely no issue with the fact that they're still tapping into the old school economy while funding the future. So if you think we can't talk about this until we're perfect, this is not about perfection, ladies and gentlemen. This is about getting started. about changing things, doing things 1% better every day. And when we think about convergent mega trends today, according to our clients at McKinsey, why should you be curious about trends? Is that trends are the best forecast about your future success in business. In fact, the two trends that matter the most is whether firstly you're part of an economic region that is growing, and secondly, whether you're part of a growth industry. In Australian real estate parlance, this is like even if you bought the shittiest house on the most trendy street, you're going to do well over time. Now, I'm not saying your shitty houses on the best streets, but are we excited about this economic region for the future and our industry? Absolutely. And if you have an awesome business that taps into sustainability but also technology, you're bound to do well. We call this twin transformation. Let me just ground this in some practical realities here for a moment. At the Kering Group, which is the most sustainable fashion brand on the planet, they own little known brands like Gucci and Bottega Veneta, etc. You might have heard of them if you're into your man bags. A few years ago, they set a very ambitious target to reduce their carbon intensity by 40% between 2017 and 2024. But because they took a twin transformation approach, which is when you pursue sustainability and digital transformation at the same time, they built something known as the environmental profit and loss statement, basically a glorified Excel spreadsheet. But they're focused on their environmental footprint, but also their profitability at the same time. They were able to reduce by 40% their carbon emissions, working with all their suppliers and getting everyone in the supply chain to upskill and reduce their carbon emissions. And they hit those targets not in 7 years, but in half the time, in 3.5 years. What do we do when we have a great new innovation or a piece of intellectual property? We protect it, right, so no one can steal it. What did the Kering Group do? They went, no, we want the whole industry to move towards sustainability. So let's share our environmental profit and loss statement, our digital innovation with every competitor, every fashion school, every fashion entrepreneur, so they could do the same thing. This is purpose-led business, good for people, planet, as well as profits at the same time. One of our other clients at Telia, which is like the Telstra of Scandinavia, a few years ago by the Norwegian government, they were tasked with thinking and rethinking how they do tollways. That's never been an issue in this state, right? And they thought, why on earth do we build these physical towers and then put a piece of plastic in everybody's front window that beeps, and then we have a really clunky process in the back end to charge people every time they drive on a toll road, when everybody in a car today has a smartphone? And we just ping them and charge them just like Uber would in the background. Now, one of our clients is Fleet Partners, an ASX-listed novated leasing and financing company. For them, they still own the plate, by the way, when they do that fringe benefits tax good stuff for every corporate employee. They still own the plate. And if somebody has a credit card that's expired, Fleet Partners gets charged when somebody drives through the toll road. For $3.50 to chase that $3.50 takes them on average 16 man and woman hours to chase that $3.50. Is this good economics? Is this an example of how humans still do robotic-style labor? What would happen if we took the robot out of the human so we could do less of the menial and the mundane and more of the meaningful and the humane? Ask yourself the question when you think about your own business, where is the AI, the virtual, the digital so far superior that we no longer need to build the physical thing, like a toll road tower? Can you challenge yourself to do this? Now, these are my two gorgeous sons, Lucian and Aurelian, 7 and 3. We live in a national park in Great Mackerel Beach in Sydney, although I'm getting lured away now to move to Queensland eventually. And no, they are not wearing a wig. This is their real Viking hair. Okay. Now, they are two beautiful boys, and the reason I work as a futurist is I think a lot about the next generation and what the world will look like for them. And in a world of AI, but also in a world where we live in a national park, and my insurance premiums for my little cabin has increased by threefold in the last 3 years because we live in the most bushfire-prone nation in the world. Right? I think about that future for these kids. I think about an era where kids are now suffering from pre-traumatic stress disorder because they are so worried about climate change. This is a known diagnosis. Stress disorder before it even happens. Now, I read a book recently called The Hidden Life of Trees. Beautiful book by Peter Waltlib, and I highly recommend it, which talks about how trees support each other in a forest. In fact, trees are highly social beings. They can send nutrients via their root system and the mycelium to trees that need their support further down the track. They can warn each other through odors when new pests and threats come to the forest. They do this not just because they are really good trees, but also because having a forest that is functional and where the trees on the periphery can stop a wind is also good for the trees in the center of that forest at the same time. I think this is the future of any industry, where we lend support, nutrients, ideas, and warn each other of threats so that the whole industry can be supportive and prosperous. This is how I think about my own family, my own community, where I live in this little hamlet of Great Mackerel Beach, where we all participate in the bushfire service together. But I also think about my kids and the fact that they don't come with an instruction manual. Who feels like this when you first became a parent, right? My oldest son, Lucian, has a little bit of pre-anxiety, and recently his GP said, hey, you can't go and see a child psychologist because it takes 9 months to do so, but in the meantime, let me prescribe you an app. Doctors and psychologists now prescribe apps. Why? Because they realize the digital world can also be a healing place. Yes, it's got issues, body dysmorphia, Instagram, all of that stuff. But when we design our digital content in the right way, it can also be soothing. Lower cortisol levels, boost serotonin levels. Digital content today is brain chemistry wrapped in story. Digital content is somebody else's brain chemistry wrapped in story. And if you tell a really, really great story about your region, about the soothing, healing impacts of the Greater Whitsunday Alliance in your regions, right? Cairns or Gold Coast, whatever it happens to be, the hinterland behind the Gold Coast, you have the impact and responsibility of soothing someone in a healing way. As a parent, I think about 1% improvements. I have a parenting coach called Genevieve Muir from Connected Parenting, and she gives me little tips every day of how I can connect before I correct, because there's no instruction manual with kids, and how I do things better by my sons. Together with the GP, I landed on this little innovation with my son, Lucian. Now, on the $3 billion app, Headspace, does anyone use it? We sit down as a science fiction family, and maybe in a very age-inappropriate fashion, I introduced him too early to Star Wars, which is maybe why he's got a little bit of pre-anxiety. But to counteract that, we now sit down and we do breath work every night with Yoda. So he can calm his nervous system and we get to the really, really good storytelling sooner. Imagine if your digital interface, your website, your TikTok dancing, your social media presence, the customer journeys that you design are as soothing and as calming as a mindfulness app. Wouldn't this be an amazing achievement, right? Where you're healing people from the inside, but you're also introducing them to why they should come and spend time in your region. We can turn anything into a great digital story. A few years ago, we worked with an online travel agency and Amex. And they were like, let's just produce really helpful content and debunk old school myths. One of the old school myths is, when is the best time to buy a plane ticket? And we've all heard about lastminute.com, or if you buy it way in advance, you'll get the best deal. They're like, no, let's take the AI and look at the big data. They're like, the best prime booking window is 120 days to 30 days before the day of travel. And if you buy it on Amex, you get 55 days interest free. So if you go for a business trip to Gold Coast, maybe you can even collect the cash before you pay Amex. Is it good for cash flow conversion cycles? Absolutely. What do you think they did with this digital content? They publish it to build trust that Amex and this online travel agency want to ensure people make the smartest decisions. This is brain chemistry wrapped in story that gets people to trust the OTA and Amex in a guilt-free, helpful fashion for people, planet, and profits. What's trust? Trust is a confident relationship with the unknown. It's a confident relationship with the unknown. And what's the most human bridge that we can build between the known and the unknown? Is through story. If somebody's never been to Great Keppel Island, for example, we need to build a story between the known and the unknown to get them to trust you. Any story about new technology is just about moving from an aeroplane to ride sharing to trusting an autonomous car, for example, goes through science fiction storytelling. But of course, as humans, we sometimes struggle with these changes, doing something different. To illustrate this point, in 1967, the Swedish government decided we were going to stop driving on the left side of the road and start driving on the right side of the road, because that is the future of transport, ladies and gentlemen. Right? The big change management mantra of the Swedish government at the time was, just smile, we're all just new at this. Isn't that a wonderfully liberating change management mantra? Just smile, we're all just new at this AI stuff. So imagine for a moment sending your kids, your nieces, your nephews out for a moment across this intersection. Maybe even your elderly grandmother, confidently across this intersection on their way to the retirement village. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, over the next 10 years, we'll be able to save 1.1 million human lives courtesy of autonomous vehicles. When I recently returned from my most recent overseas holiday from Liguria, Italy, unscathed, I personally welcome the day humans are no longer behind the wheels, at least in Liguria, Italy. When I shared this with one of our clients at Bharti Airtel in Mumbai, India, they said, Anders, this is nothing new. This is what it looks like in Mumbai, India every day of the week. Plus we have semi-autonomous cows as well. Now, my mum always says, Anders, the digital world feels digitally dehumanized, but I would in fact argue that the most human-centric journey that we can ever have in the future is one that is digitally augmented. One where we no longer have humans who think it's a good idea to text or drink while driving, for example, because the technology is more humane than anything we could have offered in yesteryear. Now, final little story. At UPS, a little American delivery company, a few years ago, at a conference similar to this, somebody said, hey, we see that 22.5% of all vehicle accidents happen when we turn into oncoming traffic in a country where they drive on the correct side of the road. Right? This comes with downtime for our vehicles. It comes with personal injury claims, even death. Why don't we just stop turning left? In Australia, read right. Because we're idling in traffic and it wastes everybody's time and precious resources. Now, this harebrained human idea had some merit, but they were like, let's test it. So let's fit all our vehicles with RFID tags, GPS technology, right? Telematics, to see whether this harebrained idea had any merit. And of course it did. Today at UPS, they credit this one human piece of creativity, now digitally enhanced with the AI Orion route optimization plan, with them delivering 350,000 more parcels every year because of that one decision to stop turning left. They've taken the equivalent of 20,000 passenger cars worth of emissions off the road as a result, saving the planet. And of course, they're wasting fewer planetary resources as a result as well. This is good for people, planet, as well as profits. Ladies and gentlemen, start preparing for sustainable futures today, where you focus on twin transformation that is good for the environment, people, planet, as well as profits, as well as future generations. Because that future is where you, your kids, and your grandkids are going to spend the rest of your lives. Thank you very much, and see you in that future.